The social issue I would like to discuss was I did like how does sex affect people on TV? So I came up with that thought in my mind, and then as I was doing like a little research, I found a lot of articles on adolescence that focus on adolescence. So then I was like, well, how does so now like, how does like sex kind of influence like teenagers and stuff like that? And I was doing my research and I came across a few articles. One of the articles was from amfar.org, and it's a poll of how much influence does television have on the sexual behaviors of teens. Um, in that study, they I guess they had teenagers engage in sexual programming and stuff like that. They each watched different types of programming, but basically, um, the study found that teenagers were more by watching this type of stuff on TV. Teenagers were more prone to engage in sexual activity earlier than they normally would if they didn't watch that. So I found that study to kind of be interesting, and also they did like another poll just of like like not a random, but I mean of random people, but just a general question without kind of like doing like a study or poll. And, they asked how much influence does television have on the sexual behaviors of teens? And 76.6% of the people that they polled, um, you know, said they had a strong influence. And 18.7% said they had a slight influence. 4.8% said they had no influence at all. So basically, 95% of the people that they polled, which found that sexual content on television, um, had an influence on teenagers, and that was a pretty high percentage. When I was studying, when I was kind of thinking over the topic, I knew it was an issue. I just didn't realize it would be such a high number, or such a um, I don't want to say in-depth study, but just a study where I didn't know it would have that much of an influence on especially teenagers. I guess that's really and it goes on to kind of talk about how they're kind of coming into the age sexually and running into these programs kind of um, influences them in a major way as they kind of coming into their own in that area. So I found that interesting. Another article that I read and kind of used for this was the from ncbi.nlm.nih.gov. It's about adolescent sexuality in the media. Um, and there they had a study where they found um, um, I guess 80, and I'm quoting here, 80% of adolescents report that their peers find out some or a lot about sex, drugs, and violence from television shows, movies, and other media. So I found that kind of rate of influence like kind of high. Like 80% of adolescents kind of say they get they find out more about sex from like their parents and stuff like that from movies, television shows, and entertainment media. So I was like, wow. So that kind of caught my eye a lot as well. But the as far as like the opposition, like counter evidence and alternate explanations, like I guess that it was hard for me to kind of figure out like the counter evidence, like and stuff like that. Other than obviously they have like educational programs and stuff like that on TV. But when it comes to actual like the sexuality in the media, I did kind of find something. Whereas I know the previous article on amfar.org, they kind of came up with a way to show how adolescents um, engaged in sexual activity, um, at an earlier age than they normally would by watching TV and movies and stuff like that. However, but from the same article from ncbi.nlm.nih.gov, um, they kind of say that the research that they do they don't really adequately um, they don't really address the effects of the sexual content in the media on adolescents' beliefs, the knowledge, the intentions, and behaviors. So basically, they're saying like, so they can't really tell how specifically their knowledge or their intentions and their actual behaviors would be based on their research and findings on how like the programs, how the television and films like influence teenagers and adolescents. So that's kind of like a, like the opposite of the other article. The one saying that they kind of can show an actual percentage of teenagers and how it affects them at an early an age, whereas this article is saying they can't really pinpoint exactly how this research can and expose can 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 kind of showcase like teenagers' intentions, their knowledge, beliefs, and behaviors, based on the sexual content that they watch. So I guess I found that kind of interesting. But personally, obviously I knew, growing up as an adolescent, and you kind of watch sex on TV, and you think it's one way. You're really not introduced to love at an early age. You kind of don't. You hear the word love and you know about marriage, but you kind of don't know what it is until you actually get into a real relationship. And it's weird. I don't know if it's like a hidden trick, but I'm sure like a lot of adults, and people that make films, know that love should be like the more focal point when it comes to relationships instead of like the physical aspects of it. And as you're growing up, it's like more physical. And if for whatever reason, like I guess probably for money reasons, but for whatever reason, these people want to showcase the physical part of sex more, to adolescents, and instead of like the love portion and the emotional part. And I'm sure a lot of kids like myself kind of grow up not knowing. It's like, oh man, I wish they would have kind of helped me introduce. I guess you can always argue, oh, it's the parents' fault or whatever. But I grew up in a single parent home, so. But I guess I just wish that like the content wouldn't focus more on the physical standpoint more and kind of help kids kind of focus more on the love portion of it, because I think as they get into it, they would appreciate it more. Because I'm sure I'm not the only one who grew up thinking like, oh, it's a physical thing, and love is is like this beautiful word, and kind of reserved for marriage or maybe later on in life. Whereas it, I don't think there's anything wrong with like that kind of like um um that high school sweetheart type of love where two people kind of meet at a young age and grow old together. I think that should kind of be more of a norm than the more physical thing that the media and like TV shows and movies kind of portray just blatantly, just making it feel like as you grow up that's a normal way to be, and it totally isn't. And I know like the writers and all these people that make these films know that because they're older, but it's weird that they would kind of influence such a influence such like a a major part of people's lives in such a way just because they don't know, just to make a buck, and it's kind of sad in a way. Um, and but going into the and going into the research, I kind of thought I didn't know I knew I would find articles that didn't that would speak negatively about the program. I just didn't think it would be such high numbers, and it goes into just it's like, man, it's just I didn't realize there'd be so many articles on the stuff, and it's almost like reading the articles and just for the personal standpoint, like why do they put that stuff out there, kind of, and because a lot of stuff you read is factual, and I want to be as unjudgmental as I can. However, especially with this type of subject, it's like you know, you know, it's like sex just leads to a lot of you know bad relationships and a lot of long term. It has a lot of long term negative effects on people that it just seems like TV and media just not sensitive about. Yet they know you know how much of a negative influence that you know it probably has, especially on teenagers. But for whatever reason, I guess they need to make that money.